recording that, but you are welcome to go Monday, Wednesday. I'll have lectured over this like properly on those topics, over just what you need to know about them is what I'm saying. Okay, so anyways, if you guys don't have any questions about the tests and stuff like that, then we'll just kind of crank through it. Okay, so chapter 19 is dealing with skin and eye. You will see that my presentations are not going to be unlike what you guys do for your presentations. Essentially, I'm going to have stuff on my slides with more details than what you need to know. I'm going to try to cover the details that you do need to know. But sometimes the stuff on these slides, just like the other slides, is helped more as supplementary information than it is the direct stuff you need to know. But if I start talking about how this creates bullae lesions, and you don't know what a bullae lesion is, well, it'll be up on the slide, and I may or may not discuss what that actually means, but you might want to be aware of it. Okay, so we already know about the skin and the defenses that it provides with us. We know that your cells themselves, especially on the surface, we have these drier, a lot of them are mostly dead skin cells. They'll be shed, and then with them, we've shed any microbes that might be on the surface of your skin as well. We've got hairs that trap debris. We've got pH, like lower pH levels, more acidic. We have salt in the environment that's higher salt content in what these microbes are usually, accustomed to. And the organisms on your skin tend to be, they're able to tolerate, they're halo tolerant, we call them. Not halophiles, they don't actually love the salt or, preferentially grow in salt, but they are very tolerant of the salt. And they actually make products that help maintain the saltiness and fight off other microbes with antimicrobial chemicals that they can make. Antimicrobial lipids, for example, and all sorts of stuff that can help keep those bad guys from invading. They don't just take up the stadium seats, but also hold guns, if you will. So they protect that way. So we've already learned about keratin, which is our waterproofing protein that helps keep all of our skin, nice and waterproof and impermeable to some of our microbes as well. Our sweat glands have a moist environment where a lot of our microbiome will live, but it's also an area where we have flushing out of microbes as well as a salty and low pH environment. Our normal microbiota, again, they produce lipids and other things that will help fight off our bad guys. We'll talk about some examples of them in a moment. I already said all this. Right. Here we have our main contributors to our microbiome are going to be Staphylococcus epidermidis and Propionibacterium acnes. Propionibacterium acnes is P. acnes. You've probably heard about it in like skincare commercials or whatever. Those guys are the cause of typical acne. Usually if you have acne, the pustules associated with them are going to be populated by that. About 4% of the population has staph in their microbiome. Almost 100% of staph on the planet is going to be at least resistant to penicillin. There are stronger antibiotics out there up to the methicillin level, and anything less strong than methicillin and MRSA will be resistant to methicillin and anything less strong. So that's why it has its own classification. Even the Staph aureus on your skin right now, if you are one of the 4%, will be resistant usually to penicillin. If you have any puncture wounds or something like that, then it could become potentially a pathogen in your own body, but on your skin surface by itself, it shouldn't be causing any problems. These are some of the skin lesions that we'll see associated with some of these skin diseases, such as bulla, which are just blisters, essentially. It's a fancy word for a blister. Rashes, papules, which are going to be little elevated bumps. I don't know what else to say. Petechiae, ruptured vessels. There's also vesicles, like what we see with chickenpox. All right, so we've already talked about MRSA. So moving on. We can identify staph typically by its shape being coccus round. We have it being gram-positive. It's non-modal. It forms these grip-like clusters called staphylo orientations or aggregations, however you want to look at that, but definitely grape-like clusters. And it has preferences for the environment of the skin and even makes enzymes that help it to live on the skin and even be able to break into the deeper layers of the skin if we were to introduce it into a wound. So hyaluronidase is one of those virulence factors that it has that will help it break down the hyaluronic acid in your extracellular matrix. So that's staph. It also makes an enzyme called coagulase. That coagulase enzyme will help coagulate plasma. your plasma is leaked into your wound areas, creating the swelling, the edema. And with it, it will water down any toxins that these organisms might make, as well as the organisms themselves, and any food or nutrients they might need. If they can coagulate that, it kind of defeats the purpose of having that plasma infiltrate. So coagulase helps with that in that regard, but it's also useful for testing it. So if you think somebody has a skin infection and you look at it in a gram stain and it's a staphylococcus of some kind, you mix it with some rabbit plasma. If it coagulates that plasma, then it produces coagulase, and it will be a Staphylococcus aureus is what does that. So that's an identifying test. Next is impetigo. Impetigo is another skin disease that's associated with staph, but usually is started by strep of all things. So it's usually a mixture of staph or Streptococcus pyogenes. Again, Streptococcus is just going to be a chain of cocci, the round cells. It's also gram-positive. And pyogenes is just that species that's associated with strep throat and impetigo and other diseases as well. Children usually are going to get impetigo. This is that flaking skin. A lot of times what we see with cradle cap can be either impetigo or it could be a fungal infection or a mixture of the two. So, but impetigo is pretty common in kids. It's this flaky skin infection, usually started by strep and then followed up by S. aureus, which creates the worst aspects of the disease. The staph creates these exfoliative toxins A and B. They're exfoliative. That's why we have the flaking of the skin. And again, we can test for it with coagulase. Streptococcus pyogenes, again, we've already introduced it. It's also the cause of strep throat, not just impetigo, but strep throat, scarlet fever, pneumonia, puerperal fever, which is, you're going to see spots all over the body, kind of like what we see with scarlet fever, necrotizing fasciitis, bloodstream infections, and rheumatic fever. We're not going to be necessarily getting into necrotizing fasciitis separately from this. So I'll mention briefly, necrotizing fasciitis is called that because it is, in fact, necrotizing of the fascia. So we're talking about the lower layers in the epidermis and the dermis, causing like basically decay of the tissues in those areas. This is flesh-eating bacteria is what we're talking about. So in order to stop these infections, if you suspect that it might be necrotizing fasciitis, you're going to look at that infection area and basically draw a circle around the redness. And if it spreads beyond that Sharpie line within a certain amount of time, then you're going to suspect that it is probably necrotizing fasciitis. When this happens, the infection usually spreads so quickly that antibiotics can't control it. So you have to proceed with debridement. That's removing the dead tissue that's associated with it, as well as any infected tissue that hasn't quite died yet, and often healthy tissue with it, just to prevent it from spreading any further. This is a very fast way to lose a limb, and it's usually what will progress if cellulitis isn't contained and stuff like that. So we'll be getting into cellulitis in a moment, but that's the flesh-eating bacteria, often associated with Streptococcus pyogenes, but it can be caused by other bacteria as well. That's necrotizing fasciitis. To identify Streptococcus pyogenes, you can do rapid tests like what we see with COVID, but for strep. We also have beta hemolysis on blood agar. We're not going to see that with all kinds of strep bacteria. So Streptococcus pyogenes is beta hemolytic, so we'll have true clearing of those red blood cells, and its sensitivity to certain antibiotics. Cellulitis is a tissue illness, like deeper now in the tissue. You do not have to have open wounds to introduce this. It could just be bacteria making their way deeper into the flesh without an open wound necessarily. You'll have pain, tenderness, swelling, warmth spread into nearby tissues. Usually you see redness, kind of like tendriling out from the area where you have the inflammation. This is common in the lower leg because that's where we have less circulation than anywhere else in our body. It's also what's usually associated with diabetics whenever they have injuries, or people who are immune compromised. Next is staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. This is caused by Staph aureus, causing those bullous lesions or those blisters, essentially the top layers of the skin detaching from the lower layers of the skin and filling with fluid just from that inflammatory response, like a normal blister, but way bigger. So we're talking about entire trunk or like the arm or something like that. This is usually what we see this in children. So it could be, they call it a systemic form of impetigo. You get impetigo and it doesn't get controlled, or your body just isn't able to control it with its own immune system yet. I had my cousin's kid had this. She lived in Western Kansas, and they had to drive all the way into Denver to go find a specialist to help treat this because it was so severe their local doctors couldn't do it. So it presents with lesions caused by those exfoliative toxins. So this is an adult that has SSSS. It's that big bullous lesion. You'll have like breaking open of it, just like any other blister, but they're just giant blisters all over the body. Very, very painful, and it leaves you susceptible to secondary infections. It's much like a burn with how it would leave the skin. All right, next is gas gangrene. This is clostridial myonecrosis caused by the bacterium Clostridium perfringens. Clostridium, being Clostridium, just like bacillus, is endospore forming gram-positive bacterium. So these guys are also anaerobic, and they require anaerobic conditions in order to have the exotoxins that lead to the presentation of the disease. Clostridium perfringens, like a lot of other Clostridium species, are not rare by any sense of the imagination. Just like Clostridium botulinum, you might think botulism, ooh, super rare. People don't really get it. I mean, you can go to the doctor and get shots with the toxin, but the disease itself is super rare. You're not really going to see those bacteria anywhere. That is a lie. These bacteria are everywhere. This is why we have to sanitize whenever you are making beer at home, whenever you're canning things and all this stuff. These bacteria are just freaking everywhere. Same thing with Clostridium perfringens. It's on your skin, in the vaginal canal, in the soil, all over the place. But they're not an issue as long as there's air, oxygen nearby, because these anaerobes are not equipped to deal with oxygen. So they'll just chill until they go anaerobic. So usually this requires a deep wound. Deep wounds will introduce the endospores, and then they'll grow and then eventually lead to the development of gas gangrene. So here are two examples of the types of disease associated with gas gangrene. We have cellulitis version, and we have the myonecrosis version. Cellulitis is going to stay kind of pretty much localized in the tissue, upper layers of the tissue. Yeah, that's pretty much what you're going to see there. And then in true myonecrosis, where we have death of the muscle. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. So it's true necrosis, right? We have true death of tissue here. Because of all the inflammation that's involved, we'll have swelling, but in addition to the swelling from the inflammation, we also have swelling from the gas that's being produced by the bacteria. Why are these bacteria producing gas? Well, they're anaerobes. So like we've learned in our lab from SIM and TSIA, when we're looking at sulfur reduction, you are essentially taking your final electron acceptor, which for us in aerobic respiration is oxygen. Our oxygen takes the spare protons coming through the ATP synthase. We take those extra electrons that went through the electron transport chain, the H's, the electrons, and half of that oxygen to make H2O as our product. Well, the anaerobes use sulfate, not oxygen. And instead of making H2O, they make H2S. And that's dihydrogen sulfide, and it is a gas. In our media, we actually bind that gas with an iron compound and make it a precipitate, a black precipitate. But there's none of that going on here. So the gas itself that they're making, that H2S, will collect in the tissue and cause the tissue to expand, sort of like blowing little balloons inside of the tissue. And that will cause the tissue to expand. The inflammation will cause the tissue to expand. And that's where we will start having to introduce fasciotomies. You guys don't know what a fasciotomy is? It's where we cut open like a leg or arm or whatever. We see this in burns a lot of times. Any sort of severe trauma to large tissue areas where the tissue will start to swell to the point that it might rip itself open. If that happens, it's not as likely to heal well. It's more likely to be susceptible to infection. So you'll see fasciotomies with gas gangrene to help release the pressure and release the gas and fluids as well. If that isn't done early enough, you will develop these blisters that'll fill with this black fluid and it'll ooze, and it is just gross. So there's wet gangrene. This is obviously a drier gangrene that's associated with it. This is an example of a tissue cross-section for gangrene, gas gangrene, where we have that pocket of air, or little pockets of air where the white is. That's gas-filled spaces involved with the bacteria that are producing the gas in the muscle. The little dark spots are the bacteria, and the pink is the muscle tissue. They also make enzymes that help them invade deeper tissues. Now we're moving on to the vesicular and the pustular rashes. This is going to be our poxes mostly. So first is chicken pox, pretty mild in people with healthy immune systems. Usually we get this in our adolescent ages, but even if you haven't had it in your adolescent age, you are probably getting vaccinated for it. So you should be protected from it. If you were getting vaccines since you were younger for chickenpox and you have not had chickenpox, you better stay up with your vaccines and your boosters because you can get chickenpox still later in life. It doesn't protect you forever. You have to get boosters. So get your boosters, especially later in life, because if you get chickenpox later in life, it presents more like shingles than it will like traditional chickenpox, but not quite true shingles, which we'll talk about in a moment. Anyways, you don't want to get chickenpox later in life. Better to have it as a kid or stay vaccinated. Let's see. Go to, if you were in the 80s like I was as a kid, and kids in your class were getting sick with the chickenpox, they would send out notices to the other parents in your class, and you could bring your kid by for a party and go get your kid sick with chickenpox. So there was no vaccine back when I was a kid. That didn't exist. So you just got the chickenpox when you're young, so you don't have to worry about it when you're an adult, and then you're supposedly covered for the rest of your life. It takes about 10 to 20 days to show symptoms. So those itchy spots and stuff don't even show up for 10 to 20 days after you go to this party. So you don't know your mom brought you there to get chickenpox. Then you'll only have the spots and the itching and the symptoms for about a week. And then those will start to recover after that. The risk here isn't even with the spots themselves. They're fine, they'll heal up and go away. But kids are going to scratch it with their dirty little nails and cause secondary bacterial infections. And those are what are going to cause scars. I have a lot of scars from the chickenpox when I was a kid. Shingles is reactivation of the chickenpox virus. Chickenpox is not called chickenpox virus. It's varicella zoster. So varicella zoster, also known as human herpes virus 3. It is a herpes virus, and so it will remain latent in your nerves. When you are older, if you've had chickenpox like I have, then that can come back out of your nerves and re-express itself along whatever part of the body that nerve is associated with. In this picture, we're talking about somebody who had nerves in their head, where it re-expressed itself in the face. It usually is more common to be in the face or the trunk, the back. You can also get it in your butt, whatever. It just depends on what nerve it hides along. You want to get vaccines when you get older in age, even if you've had chickenpox. For example, when I get closer to my 50s, I will have to get vaccines for shingles so that I don't reactivate my own chickenpox. Smallpox is another disease that's caused by a virus. It's a skin disease, it's very disfiguring. These will leave scars even if you don't scratch them. They're very, very disfiguring, very painful disease. Another one that's about 30% mortality rates, or variola major, which is the cause of the worst kind of smallpox that you could get. So disfiguring, viral infection of the skin. There is a vaccine available for smallpox. The vaccine for smallpox is created from the virus vaccinia. So that's not the same virus, right? Smallpox caused by variola. Vaccinia is the cause of cowpox. Vacca is cow in Latin. So vacca, cow. In case you're not making the connection between the word vaccine and that, you should be. So what I'm saying is the very, very, very first vaccine that ever existed is the vaccine against smallpox, created from cowpox, vaccinia. Okay. Edward Jenner was the guy that discovered this. He noticed that milkmaids had prettier skin than everybody else because everybody else was suffering with smallpox. They were handling cows that had cowpox. They'd get a couple lesions on their hands. They would heal up just fine. And then they were protected from smallpox for the rest of their lives. So he took scrapings from cow's udder that had cowpox and inoculated his own son and pushed him out into the population that had smallpox. His kid was protected and didn't get smallpox. We're talking about a 20% mortality, 22, depending on the version, minor or major, minor being 20%, major being about 40% mortality rate in modern times, just like 1700s. So yeah, good guy. Very ethical, but back then they didn't have the same rules as we did. And that is where the first vaccine came from, was that. And that's why vaccines are called vaccines today. It doesn't exist on the planet anymore. It's been eradicated thanks to that vaccine. It does exist in cold freezers in the United States and Russia and some other countries as well. We still vaccinate our own military for smallpox for that reason. Russia still vaccinates every single person in their population. Put it in perspective of how much of a concern that is for bioterrorism. All right, hand, foot, and mouth disease we already talked about, so I'm not going over it. Or did we talk about that? Yeah, we just did, right? No? Damn it, you guys, that was my other class, wasn't it? Okay, so in my other class this morning, no, we talked about the parvovirus one. Anyways, the fifth disease. Okay, I always think of these two when I think of the two of them because I think of them as being so similar because they're little kid disease with rashes. Okay, so hand, foot, and mouth disease is caused by Coxsackie virus, Coxsackie B virus actually. So it's just sore throat, being sick in general, and you get a little bit of a rash. If you have a healthy immune system, you're going to kick it pretty easily. That's all you need to know about it. Spots on the hands and feet and the trunk are most common. Why do adults get it? Adults can get it if you have, so this is all about like how your immune system responds to things. So some people's immune systems, they just haven't reassorted their genes enough to fight it off as effectively. It's really more or less what it comes down to. So yeah, it's just a matter of your immune system and how it was designed, as well as how healthy you are, that sort of stuff. Yeah. I think it's one of those things too, where if you've had it as a little kid, you're less likely to get it again as an adult. You know, you've got immunity to it. And it's one of those diseases, like you may not even have known that you really had it as a kid too. Your parents would have known, got a rash. Cool. So, sorry.
I was just gonna say, it is kind of funny. It sounds like almost like a medieval disease or something.
Yeah, so there's two.
This is what.
Right, it's gross. Like the name is gross to me. Hand, foot, and mouth disease. Yeah, they didn't even try, did they? Yeah, so there's that. And there's also one called hoof and mouth disease that people can get that too, but it's mostly in animals. But that is one where they'll have vesicles and stuff that'll break open in the mouth and all that. We don't know that necessarily for our class, but one of my other students is presenting on that. And I literally always get them confused because of the name. Because they usually don't call it hoof and mouth. They usually call it foot and mouth. So there's hand, foot, and mouth, and then there's foot and mouth. And I'm like, you're not making it easy. But yeah. All right. So you guys do need to know the hand, foot, and mouth for the kids. That's Coxsackie virus. Rash. Other than that, it's not that special. All right. Maculopapular rashes like measles, rubella, fifth disease, and roseola. We've got two of them we can mark off already. So I'm not going to be going over the measles. And I'm not going to be going over the other one. Thank you. Okay, rubella, I would have known it when it came to me. Rubella is actually a pretty serious one. We know measles, mumps, rubella. You probably don't think about rubella. Nobody ever talks about rubella. It's something you can get even as an adult, but most people are going to be exposed to it when they're younger, if they are exposed to it. And we just don't see it a lot anymore because we vaccinate so widely for measles, mumps, and rubella. This is an issue more in pregnant women than it is in actual adults or something, or even kids that much. Kids that get this will get a disease, you'll be sick. That's pretty much it. But women who are pregnant in their first trimester can have miscarriage or permanent defects of the newborn. It's actually very common if you do get this infection to have those effects if you're pregnant. So that's why they push it so much and have it included in the vaccine that most people are going to be getting. Postnatal rubella, this is if you get rubella after you're born, and it's just pretty tame. You might get a little bit of a rash. They're showing the rash in the square, and it's like you can barely even see that there is a rash. It's super minor as long as you are old enough to have your own immune system. Then we have congenital rubella, where this is where you would be getting it in the womb. Again, you could get this during the first trimester, that we have the most risk associated with that, but you could get it at any point during pregnancy. You're likely to have very serious permanent defects associated with it. Next, we have fifth disease, which we already talked about. It's human parvovirus B19. Next is roseola. This is really only going to be seen in young children and babies. 70% of whom are infected will not have any symptoms or signs at all. So yeah, so most people aren't going to see signs or symptoms. And if you do, it's like a rash and you feel sick. You might have a high fever if you have symptoms. You might get a high fever the fever could cause seizures, but it's not really the virus in itself that is the fever associated with it. 100% of adults will have had this at some point in their life. So you all have had this, you just didn't know. Probably you're the 70%. All right, warts are next. These are common. If you have ever had a wart on your hand or known anybody that's had a wart on their hand or anywhere else in your body, it's probably caused by human papillomavirus. Almost all warts are. There's so many freaking strains of HPV out there. It is insane. There's like hundreds of strains. There's some of them that are associated with genital warts or with things like cervical cancer. There's several. I mean, I'm talking like dozens of strains associated with cancers like cervical cancer, anal cancer, oral cancer, and all sorts of things that could be associated with HPV, incorporating its little DNA into your little DNA and disrupting the reproductive process of your own cells, but that would be the cancer. Most warts that are going to appear on your skin, however, are also caused by different forms of HPV. So they are contagious. So if you ever heard that warts are contagious, you're absolutely right. Warts are contagious because they're caused by a virus. Especially if you have warts that you can see on skin, somebody has raised warts, the skin cells that they're shedding are containing the virus actively. So that's how it spreads. There's another form of a wart-like illness called molluscum. It's gross to me. You just say molluscum, like mollusks. Ugh. Contagiosum. They look like warts, but they're not true HPV warts. It's not HPV. So here are warts. My least favorite part of all of these talks is the warts. Seed warts that are going to be raised, and they're usually painless, that are on fingers and other body parts. Plantar warts that are deep, they're painful. They might feel a little bit raised, but they're mostly flat and typically in thicker skin areas like the soles of the feet. Then we have flat warts that are truly flat that you can see on the face, the trunk, and the elbows and the knees. Molluscum contagiosum, again, it's on its own. Wart-like eruptions. Children might have it pretty much anywhere in the body, but adults usually get it associated with sexual transmission. So in the genital area, if you are immune compromised, you can get these all over the body. It can be very disfiguring. This looks very similar to smallpox, but with these wart-like eruptions. All right, moving on to leishmaniasis. Leishmania, we have the flat ulcers, essentially. So they're open, oozing wet wounds that are associated with leishmania. And here, this can be cutaneous or mucocutaneous. And they kind of talk about where they can be found. So cutaneous is in the skin. Mucocutaneous can have these lesions appear in the mucous membranes or the skin. The cutaneous versions are in like the Mediterranean area, Africa, and Mediterranean regions, and some parts of Asia, whereas the mucocutaneous is just Central and South America. It's transmitted by the bites of sandflies. We see an upsurgence of this in our troops when they went to Desert Storm, the war on Iraq and Afghanistan. They would be getting bitten by these sandflies and get the cutaneous version of this infectious leishmaniasis. Cutaneous anthrax, we already talked about anthrax in general, but this is another picture of that black eschar that can develop. Let's not forget how serious that this disease can be. It's a 20% on that low end for that. All right, next we're moving on to ringworm. These are our cutaneous mycoses. What that means is cutaneous means your skin, and a mycosis is a single form of mycoses, which is the plural. A mycosis is a fungal infection. So these are fungal infections of the skin. Any fungal infection of the skin is a cutaneous mycosis, and another colloquial term for that is ringworm. It is not worms, it is fungus, okay? Keep that in your mind. They're all named in Latin terms, still using tinea, which means worm. So it's tinea capitis for the scalp, for example, but they're all just fungal infections, okay? There's 39 different species of fungus that you don't need to know the names of, but do know that it is a fungus. These guys are also known as dermatophytes, derma for skin, phytes being the organisms that infect it. So these are all fungal. We have scalp, beard, body, groin, foot, and nail. The ones that you guys are probably most familiar with will be the foot ringworm or tinea pedis, aka athlete's foot. So we're talking about really, really common stuff here. Obviously the ringworm that you get on your skin, which would be the corpus, I believe, corporis. That's the body one where you get ringworm on your skin. And then ringworm of the nail, which is also known just as nail fungus. Okay. Yes, I had ringworm when I was a little kid, and it was from the neighborhood cat.
Yes, we have 6 cats in the clinic right now.
With ringworm? Yeah. Yes. Yes.
They're treating them like the sulfur dip.
Yeah, it's the thing with the animals too. If they just have mild forms of it, you don't necessarily see it until they start losing their hair from it. And so it's like hidden under the fur. And so they can be like, you're petting the nice little kitty in the neighborhood. If it's really, it's got ringworm there underneath its little pretty little fur.
I used to get ringworm all the time.
Pet the animals. Yeah. That's the only time I've ever had it. And it was that stray cat. And I really don't like cats because of that and because I'm allergic. No offense to the cats themselves. I like keep a little barrier is how I feel about it. Yeah. All right. So we've got superficial mycoses as well. So those were our are mycoses that are cutaneous mycoses that have actual like inflammation and damage to the tissue associated with them. But the superficial ones, we're not having damaging inflammation here. These guys do have visible effects, so visible signs associated with them, but they aren't as damaging to the tissue. So this is going to be like tinea versicolor, where you have a fungal infection of the skin that affects your melanocytes and leads to skin pigment color changes, but it's not harmful. It just causes color change of the skin. Other conditions that fall into this category would be folliculitis, psoriasis, and seborrheic dermatitis that are fungal infections that don't necessarily cause penetrating harm, but they are infections. This is a picture of tinea versicolor. Now I want to be clear that I can never remember because I always talk about this and then I remember that there's like the genetic form of having different colors of skin pigmentation is not this, okay? This is like an infectious version of that fungal infection. This can be treated and you can actually regain the color back to your skin afterwards. But there are genetic versions of patches of skin that are not pigmented or patches of skin that are more pigmented. They're not related to fungal infections, okay? Exactly. This is one of those terms that if you said it to me, I would recognize the term, but I can never remember. Input, is it vitiligo? Yes, that's what it is. Thank you. Vitiligo. I never remember it when it comes down to it. All right. Surface of the eye is our next ones. Well, all the eye parts is our next ones. We're going to start with our protective coverings of your eye, your mucous membrane, and the outer shielding of your eye being the conjunctiva. So all those outer protective layers. We have oil secretions, we have tears, we have the conjunctiva itself, all protecting. The tears are essentially going to be having our lysozyme that breaks down your peptidoglycan. Your cornea is that outer layer of the actual eyeball itself. That's going to be the windshield of the eye. You blink, it moves debris away. Tears flush debris away. The cornea protects the eye. The conjunctiva protects all of that. That's the gist of what's protecting your eye. The eye is also immune privileged, meaning that we have a decreased immune response in the eye. We down-regulate our B and T cell response. We have reduced innate immunity as well. All of this to protect your vision so that your inflammatory response doesn't damage your tissues in your eye and render you blind, so you can no longer see predators in the prairie or wherever it is that you, in the savannah or wherever it is that, ancient mankind may have had to deal with back in the day. Obviously, you wouldn't want to go blind either if you had just conjunctivitis. It'd be ridiculous. So we do have immune privilege, down regulation of the immune system to protect the tissues in that area. We will see immune privilege pop up again in our nervous system diseases for obvious reasons, right? We know if you sever your spinal cord, your nerve function is gone forever for that, right? So if you have inflammatory reaction in your brain or damaging the neurons in your CNS, that's permanent damage. So we have immune privilege in the nervous system as well. We'll talk about that when we get to that, but it's the same concept here. All right. Conjunctivitis, again, inflammation of the conjunctiva, our kind of outer defense layer. This can be bacterial, viral, or allergic. Viral and allergic have clear fluid associated with it, while bacterial has a milky or yellowish discharge associated with it. All of them have redness in the eye itself. Swelling of the eyelids is very common, and photophobia, which just means like light sensitivity. We also call this pink eye. This is an image of a little baby that has the bacterial version, that milky yellow discharge. So here's summarization of any of the kinds of conjunctivitis you might see. Next, we have ocular trachoma. Trachoma actually happens to be the most common infectious version of blindness that exists. It's caused by the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis. If chlamydia sounds familiar to you, it probably should. This is exactly the exact same bacteria that causes chlamydia. It's just now when it's in your eye. So this gets transmitted to the eye. We see this mostly in third world countries where there's less hand washing, less sanitary conditions. You get these inflammatory lesions on the underside of the eye that will then rub on the cornea and scar it and then lead to blindness. It is treatable with antibiotics, but it is the most common infectious cause of blindness in the world. Funny to think about being the most common cause of infectious blindness when you've probably never heard of it. That just puts it into perspective how little we think of developing countries. So Keratitis is the next one. It's a little bit more serious as far as the progression of it and signs and symptoms associated with it. It can lead to, like it says, corneal destruction. So you could have basically a useless cornea as a result of infection that is going to be introduced into the cornea from trauma to the cornea. So scratches on the eye, most commonly due to contact use. So if you're not washing your hands when you're handling your contacts, you don't keep your sterile saline changed out often, very, very often, then this can lead to contamination of the sterile saline or your hands and then transmit it into trauma that might already exist in your eye. Why would trauma exist in your eye? Because you wear freaking contacts and it rubs on your cornea and creates abrasions on your cornea that you might not think about, especially if you switch to a new brand or just starting to wear contacts or going back to wearing them again after not wearing them for a long time, something like that. That creates trauma on your eye or any sort of eye scratch at all. Some, lint getting in your eye and you rubbed it, trauma to your eye. So that can introduce these guys in there. But now you've just created the opening. In order to get these guys in there, now you have to introduce them, usually not by not washing your hands and having touched an infected area. That could be as simple as HSV1. So there's two different kinds of herpes virus that we consider herpes simplex virus, herpes simplex 1 and herpes simplex 2. They both can cause genital herpes. They both can cause cold sores. Okay. Most commonly, cold sores are associated with HSV1 and less commonly with 2. Most commonly genital is HSV2 and most commonly with 1. So there's crossover and neither of them protect from the other one. Okay. So HSV1, you've got a cold sore that will come out when you get stressed. You're changing your contacts. You didn't wash your hands before and you had put on chapstick or something. Now you put your contact in, you've introduced HSV1, misdirected it into your eye from putting in your contacts, and now you've got keratitis. Another very common way of getting keratitis is by acanthamoeba. In case you can't tell by its name, it's an amoeba. So these are protozoa. These protozoal infections will come from your tap water or other freshwater lakes. You go swimming with your contacts in, the abrasion from the contacts and lake water debris can allow for the acanthamoeba to get into your eye, or just rinsing your hands and not using soap to help debris get away can introduce it from your own tap water. It's actually extremely common in hot water tanks. Acanthamoeba also happens to be the cause, one of the two major causes of the brain-eating amoeba. We're talking a 97% mortality rate, treatment or not. So wash your hands when you're doing your contact lenses, please. Soap, not just water. All right, river blindness. This is a chronic parasitic infection where a worm gets into your eyeball. Think about that. So flies that carry the eggs of these worms will come and land on the eyes of people in third world countries. They're rubbing their eyes, the eggs come into the body and are able to migrate. The larvae will migrate, hatch and migrate into the actual eye itself and develop into worms. These worms will live inside the eye cavity itself, in the goo inside your eye, in the fluid, the vitrea, if you will, and then will live there and cause you to be blind as it creates its little enzymes and toxins and breaks down structures inside of your eye. These worms cannot cause illness or pathogenesis without themselves being infected by a bacteria. It's like a double infection in a way. You're infected by worms that are infected by bacteria. The bacteria are called Wolbachia, and they can be treated with antibiotic. You get these worms in your eye, we give you an antibiotic against the bacteria in them, and it can actually help treat the infection. This is true of a lot of worm infections. Actually, the thing that makes heartworm pathogenic is also Wolbachia. And so you can treat heartworms by giving ivermectin along with doxycycline, and it'll be way more effective than just giving ivermectin alone and just killing the worms. So that's usually more recommended, though a lot of vets kind of want to cut back on the costs of the doxycycline. Do what you want, I guess, but yeah. Onchocerca volvulus or onchocerciasis is the name for this river blindness causative agent, okay? Guess what comes next? Because we've got just a couple more minutes, but that's just enough time. Here's a little summary chart of these diseases, what they're named, what they cause, and where they're found on the body. See what time it is, guys? We haven't had this in a long time, or you don't necessarily have to stand. Maybe we're past that and we're about to go to lab anyways, but we're going to go through this and I am going to call on you. It's been a while since who. All right, first question. Not in class. class. This is fun. I'm like, who is this? This isn't your class. Okay, well, we'll just call on groups. Bravo. Anybody from Bravo? Okay, if you want your point for this, what pathogen does the coagulase test identify? I'll tell you this, it is a skin disease. Go figure, these are all skin and eye diseases. It's a skin disease. Very early on, we talked about this in the chapter. Coagulase. The plasma test, yes, so that's going to be like MRSA stuff. So that's good. We'll take it. I suppose anybody can answer these. I don't want to just be all the same people. Let's go with Charlie next. Next question. Charlie, which organism causes gas gangrene? If you remember any aspect of this name, I'll give you the point. Anybody remember? Starts with a C. Clostridium. I heard somebody say it. Yes. I'll give the points. We're getting there. Okay. See Emily's hand go up. Perfringens. Yeah. See, we're getting it. All right. Smallpox. So this is these kinds of questions that I'm asking on here are very similar to what you're going to see on the Unit 4 test. Okay. These are not bad. And because there's so many different diseases that we have, there's like, I'm not going to go through really, really super specific stuff unless it's very pertinent to the disease. So when I ask a question like this, is smallpox caused by a virus, bacteria, prion, or protozoa? What is smallpox caused by, guys? Virus. Okay, I had Delta in my hands. I'm going to point Delta for that. Doesn't really matter. As long as you guys are participating, you guys are going to get your 1%. Everybody is. All right. Parvovirus B19. Parvovirus B19. Yes. Fifth disease. And then just help me keep track of which question I'm on. What pathogen causes the most common infectious cause of blindness in the world? This one was caused by something you wouldn't think of. Chlamydia trachomatis. That's it. Oh yeah, trachoma? It is trachoma if it's technically in the eye, but it's chlamydia of the eye. Yeah. That's crazy. That's gross. Yeah. I'm not afraid to say some of these diseases are gross. If you guys have a disease that has like very graphic pictures, something like that, you do not need in this class, because I feel like we're adults and we're all here, we know what we're getting into. If you have a graphic disease, please include the graphic pictures, because we're adults and we need to see pictures of what these diseases really look like on people. And this is why I'm not trying to like point fingers and be like, ooh, gross, don't you see? These people actually lived through these diseases and suffered from them and had to get treatment for them. And we take pictures of all these, gross aspects of them, whether it's genital, whether it is skin or any of this, they had to suffer through that in real life. And we should have respect for that as people learning about these diseases. So if you happen to have one of those diseases that has a lot of gross pictures, you don't need a content warning in this class. We all have respect for people that had to suffer through that and get treated for it. So that's what this class is for. I know. Or like frog pee, like if they pee on you, you get more. I don't know if they carry like papillomavirus, maybe. If they can, I have no idea about that.
I do have this one wart on my thumb.
Yeah, so you can go get them frozen off, and it'll get rid of it.
I've had this for years.
Yeah.
I've frozen it.
It's probably a deep tissue thing, like it's just not surface taking care of it.
And I was just like, well, I give up now.
You can't. It's like, yeah. You guys ever seen those shows where those people have like the skin infection where they have like it looks like, say, the horned man or whatever, they have like the growths off of their bodies that are like, look like horns almost coming off of them? That's just regular old warts, but their immune system just can't keep it in check. So they have some sort of defect in their immune system where those warts are growing uncontrolled. So that's crazy to think about. It's just the same virus as what you guys might have for a regular wart. It's just out of control.